Some structures shouldn't exist where they do. Stone platforms in empty deserts, roads carved straight through jungle and rock, ritual spaces buried, sealed, and forgotten on purpose. These aren't myths. They were built, used, and left behind. Tonight, we're looking at ancient sites that don't fit the timeline, places that suggest planning, precision, and knowledge far earlier than history admits. So relax. You don't need the visuals to feel this journey. Just listen. Because once you see these places together, one question stays with you. What else have we missed? Kaimanawa Wall. Hidden deep within the forests of New Zealand's North Island, far from ancient cities or known prehistoric monuments, there is a structure that quietly unsettles everything around it. No signs point the way, no fences protect it. Most people who pass nearby never realize it exists at all. This is the Kaimanawa Wall. At first glance, it looks simple, a series of large stone blocks stacked in a rough line along a hillside. But the longer you look, the harder it becomes to dismiss. The stones are rectangular. Their edges are straight. They appear layered, one course resting cleanly atop another, forming what looks unmistakably like a constructed wall. And that is the problem. According to accepted history, New Zealand was not inhabited by humans until around the 13th century AD, when Polynesian settlers arrived and became the Maori. No known civilization before them is recognized. No stone building culture. No large-scale masonry tradition. And yet, here is stone masonry. The wall sits within the Kaimanawa Range, partially buried by soil and vegetation, as if it has been there long enough for the land to slowly reclaim it. The stones are massive, some weighing several tons, and fitted together in a way that resembles ancient masonry found in parts of South America or the Mediterranean, not Polynesia. The blocks show flat faces and sharp angles. They are not rounded by erosion like natural boulders. In several places, vertical joints align cleanly, forming straight seams that extend across multiple stones. Nature does not usually work this way. Geologists who support a natural explanation argue that the wall is simply fractured ignimbrite, volcanic rock that can break along straight lines under certain conditions. According to this view, tectonic pressure and cooling created the illusion of stacked blocks. But critics point out something crucial. Fractured rock tends to crack irregularly. It produces random shapes, uneven, faces, and discontinuous lines. The Kaimanawa Wall shows consistency. The blocks appear to sit atop one another, not merely break beside each other. Some horizontal seams resemble deliberate courses rather than accidental fractures. Even more unsettling is the orientation. The wall follows a roughly linear path across the hillside. It does not scatter outward like a rockfall. It holds direction. It maintains form. If the Kaimanawa Wall were truly artificial, its implications would be enormous. It would suggest the presence of a stoneworking culture in New Zealand long before known settlement. A culture capable of quarrying, shaping, and positioning multi-ton stone blocks. A culture that left almost no other trace. And that absence raises difficult questions. Where are the tools? Where are the settlements? Where is the cultural continuity? Supporters of the artificial theory argue that time, erosion, and dense forest could easily erase wooden structures, organic, materials, and small artifacts. Stone walls, however, endure, especially when partially buried and ignored. There is also the issue of investigation. The Kaimanawa Wall has never been fully excavated. Most of what we see today is exposed surface. The lower portions remain underground. Requests for deeper archaeological study have been repeatedly denied or deferred, often citing cost, conservation concerns, or lack of evidence warranting excavation. This has only fueled suspicion, because without excavation, the question remains unanswered. If the stones extend downward in clear courses, the case for construction strengthens. If they dissolve into natural bedrock, the geological explanation prevails. But as long as the wall remains partially buried, certainty remains out of reach. Cultural sensitivity further complicates the issue. any suggestion of pre-Maori civilization is understandably controversial. History is deeply tied to identity, land rights, and heritage. As a result, the topic is often avoided rather than explored. This does not make the wall disappear. It simply leaves it unexplained. Standing before the Kaimanawa Wall today, the experience is quiet rather than dramatic. There are no grand vistas, no towering ruins, just stone, forest, and unanswered questions. It does not demand belief. It invites doubt. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Kaimanawa Wall earns its place not because it proves anything conclusively, but because it refuses to fit comfortably into what we think we know. If it is natural, it is one of the most convincing geological illusions on Earth. If it is artificial, it represents a chapter of human history that has not been acknowledged. Either way, the wall stands, unmarked, unresolved, and quietly inconvenient. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by discoveries, but by what we choose to investigate and what we choose to leave buried. And as we move forward, this pattern will repeat. Stone structures that exist without explanation, sites that challenge timelines without announcing themselves. Sometimes, the most unsettling mysteries are not hidden behind myths or legends, but lying silently in the forest, waiting for someone to look a little longer. Hattusa, greenstone. At the heart of central Anatolia, among the sprawling ruins of an ancient capital, there is a single object that refuses to explain itself. It does not tower over the landscape. It carries no inscription. It bears no carving or decoration. And yet, for thousands of years, people have treated it with quiet reverence. This is the greenstone of Hattusa. Hattusa was once the capital of the Hittite Empire, one of the great powers of the Bronze Age. Its walls, gates, and temples were built on a massive scale, carefully planned and heavily fortified. Much of it makes sense within the known capabilities of the time. The greenstone does not. The stone sits within the ruins of the Great Temple, positioned deliberately in an open courtyard. It is a large block smoothed to the touch, with a deep green color that immediately distinguishes it from the surrounding limestone. Visitors notice it instinctively, not because it is ornate, but because it feels different. Geologically, it does not belong here. The stone is commonly identified as nephrite or serpentine, materials that do not naturally occur in the immediate region around Hattusa. This alone raises questions. Transporting a stone of this size across long distances in the Bronze Age would have required planning, labor, and intention. You do not move a multi-ton stone accidentally. The surface of the greenstone is unusually smooth, far smoother than the weathered blocks around it. There are no clear tool marks, no visible chisel lines. Its edges are subtly rounded, not fractured. It feels finished, not worked, but completed. And yet, no one knows why. There are no Hittite texts that clearly describe the stone's purpose. This is remarkable because the Hittites were meticulous record keepers. They documented treaties, rituals, offering, and temple inventories on clay tablets. Thousands of these tablets have been recovered from Hattusa. The green stone is absent from them. That silence is unsettling. Local tradition suggests the stone held ritual significance, possibly associated with fertility, healing, or divine presence. Even today, visitors are drawn to touch it, to rest their hands on its surface, as if responding to a memory that predates explanation. But tradition alone does not explain placement. The stone was not used structurally. It supports no wall. It anchors no column. It sits independently, occupying space without serving an obvious architectural function. This suggests symbolism rather than utility. Some researchers have proposed that the stone served as a cult object, a physical focus for ritual activity. In many ancient cultures, stones were believed to house divine essence or serve as contact points between worlds. But if that were the case, why this stone? Why bring a rare material from far away, polish it to such smoothness, and then leave it unnamed in the written record? Another theory suggests the stone may have predated the Hittites entirely, inherited from an earlier culture whose traditions were absorbed but not fully understood. If true, The Hittites may have preserved the stone out of respect rather than comprehension. This would explain the absence of explanation. The Hittites were known to incorporate foreign gods and rituals into their system, often adopting sacred objects from conquered or neighboring cultures. The green stone may represent such an inheritance, a relic whose meaning was already ancient by the time it reached Hattusa. What complicates this further is the stone's condition. Despite its age, it shows little sign of erosion. Its surface remains intact, almost polished, even after centuries of exposure. This durability suggests careful selection of material, and possibly advanced finishing techniques. Nephrite, if correctly identified, is exceptionally tough. It resists fracturing and abrasion. Shaping it requires patience, control, and skill, even with modern tools. It is not easy to work, which raises a final question. Why invest so much effort into a single stone with no clear purpose? In a series exploring prehistoric structures and objects that appear beyond modern expectations, the green stone of Hattusa stands out because it is not dramatic. It does not overwhelm through size or complexity. Its power lies in restraint, in the fact that it exists without explanation, embedded within one of the best documented civilizations of the ancient world. Hattusa explains itself. The green stone does not. It reminds us that even in cultures rich with records, some knowledge was never written down. Some meanings were embodied rather than described. Some objects were meant to be experienced, not explained. And as we move forward, this pattern will repeat. Not every mystery announces itself with massive walls or impossible engineering. Some sit quietly in temple courtyards, smooth, green, and silent, waiting for us to admit that history, even at its most detailed, still leaves things unsaid. Poverty Point Ridges. In the quiet lowlands of northeastern Louisiana, where the land is flat, humid, and seemingly unremarkable, there is a prehistoric construction so large that it can only be fully understood from the sky. On the ground, it feels subtle, almost invisible. But from above, a pattern emerges that changes everything. This is Poverty Point. At first glance, the site appears to be nothing more than gentle rises in the earth, low ridges curving across the landscape, softened by grass and time. For years, early settlers mistook them for natural formations. Even trained observers walked across them without realizing they were standing on one of the most sophisticated prehistoric earthworks in North America. The ridges are not random. They form 6 massive concentric arcs, arranged with remarkable precision around a central open space. Together, they span nearly a mile across. Their curves are smooth, consistent, and deliberate, not the chaotic shapes left by erosion or flooding. These ridges were built by human hands. Archaeological dating places their construction around 1700 BCE, long before agriculture became widespread in the region. This alone is unsettling. The builders of Poverty Point were not settled farmers. They were hunter-gatherers, according to conventional understanding, people assumed to be mobile, small-scale, and technologically simple. Poverty Point quietly contradicts that assumption. Constructing these ridges required the movement of millions of cubic feet of earth. Soil had to be carried, shaped, and placed with intention. The curves had to be maintained over long distances. Elevation had to remain consistent. And all of this was done without metal tools, without beasts of burden, and without the wheel. Even more puzzling is how fast it appears to have been built. Evidence suggests that large portions of Poverty Point were constructed rapidly, possibly within a few decades or even a single generation. This implies organized labor, planning, leadership, and social coordination on a scale rarely attributed to prehistoric North American societies. The ridges were not isolated features. They were part of a larger complex that included massive mounds, plazas, and causeways. One mound rises more than 20 meters high and required the movement of enormous volumes of earth. Others are strategically positioned, creating sightlines and spatial relationships that feel intentional rather than accidental. What was this place for? Unlike later mound-building cultures, Poverty Point shows little evidence of permanent residential structures. There are no clear foundations for houses along the ridges. This suggests the site was not a typical city. Instead, it may have functioned as a gathering place, a ceremonial center where people from distant regions came together periodically. And they did come from far away. Archaeologists have found stone tools at Poverty Point made from materials sourced hundreds of miles away, from the Appalachian Mountains, the Great Lakes, and the Mississippi Valley. This implies long-distance trade networks operating at a time when such connectivity was thought unlikely. Poverty Point was not isolated. It was central. The layout of the ridges adds another layer of mystery. Their spacing is consistent. Their curvature suggests careful measurement. Some researchers have noted alignments that may relate to celestial events, though this remains debated. What is clear is that the ridges were not built for convenience. They curve inward, creating a shape that prioritizes geometry over efficiency. Maintaining that geometry while moving Earth by hand would have required constant correction and oversight. This is not accidental construction, it is design. One of the most unsettling aspects of Poverty Point is what it lacks. There is no evidence of a ruling elite, no palaces, no royal tombs, no clear markers of hierarchy. Yet the scale of construction implies authority and cooperation on a massive level. This suggests a different kind of social organization, one capable of mobilizing thousands of people without coercion or centralized power as we understand it today. That idea challenges long-held assumptions about how complexity emerges. Poverty Point indicates that large-scale engineering does not require agriculture, metal, or rigid hierarchy. It requires shared purpose, coordination, and knowledge passed through tradition rather than writing. The site also demonstrates an advanced understanding of landscape. The builders chose a location above flood-prone areas. The ridges themselves may have aided drainage, keeping central areas dry during heavy rains. Form and function appear intertwined. This is engineering, not improvisation. And yet, after centuries of use, Poverty Point was abandoned. There is no evidence of catastrophe, no signs of violence or sudden collapse. The people simply stopped coming. The ridges were left to erode slowly back into the land. Memory faded. By the time Europeans arrived, the builder's identity was already lost. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that seem beyond modern expectations, Poverty Point stands as one of the most difficult to reconcile, not because it uses impossible materials or mysterious tools, but because it proves complexity where we were told none should exist. It shows planning without writing, engineering without agriculture, coordination without kings. And it does so quietly, beneath grass and soil, nearly invisible unless you know where to look. Poverty Point reminds us that history often underestimates what humans can achieve together, especially when their knowledge is shared orally, embedded in practice, and expressed through landscape rather than monument. Sometimes the most advanced structures are the ones that don't look advanced at all. They don't rise. They curve. They blend into the earth. And they wait patiently for us to notice that the past was far more capable than we once believed. Rapa Iti stone platforms. Far south of Tahiti, where the Pacific grows colder and the winds never fully rest, lies a small volcanic island that feels almost forgotten by time. Steep ridges rise sharply from the sea. Narrow valleys cut deep into the land. And perched high above the shoreline, built into the island's spine, are stone platforms that challenge everything we assume about early Polynesian engineering. This is Rapa Iti. Unlike the open ceremonial sites found across much of Polynesia, Rapa Iti is defensive. Its ancient stone platforms are positioned on ridgelines and hilltops, commanding views of the surrounding ocean and valleys below. From the sea, many of them are invisible. From above, they reveal a network of carefully chosen high points, each reinforced with stone. These are not casual constructions. The platforms are built from heavy basalt blocks. Dense volcanic stone collected, transported, and stacked without mortar. Walls follow the contours of the ridges, sometimes wrapping around peaks in tight arcs. In places, terraces step down the slopes, forming layered defenses that would have been extremely difficult to assault. What makes this unsettling is the location. Rapa Iti is remote even by Polynesian standards. Reaching it requires open ocean navigation across hundreds of miles. Settling it would have been an achievement on its own. Yet the builders went further, transforming the island into a fortified landscape. This implies conflict. Traditional narratives often describe Polynesian societies as relatively peaceful, focused on navigation, agriculture, and ritual. Rapa-Iti tells a different story. Its stone platforms suggest prolonged periods of tension, competition, or warfare, enough to justify the enormous effort of hilltop fortification. And effort is the key word. Transporting basalt uphill is not easy. Doing so repeatedly across multiple sites requires coordination, planning, and leadership. These platforms were not built in isolation. They form a system, mutually visible, strategically spaced, and integrated with natural choke points. This is military architecture, but it is also something more subtle. The platforms are not crude piles of stone. Many show careful leveling. Edges are straightened. Corners are defined. The builders understood stability, load distribution, and long-term durability. These structures have endured centuries of storms, earthquakes, and erosion. The stone remains. Archaeological evidence suggests that Rapa-Iti's population once reached several thousand people, far more than the island could easily sustain. Limited arable land, steep terrain, and variable climate would have placed constant pressure on resources. In such conditions, control of territory matters. The stone platforms appeared to mark zones of authority, elevated strongholds that dominated surrounding land. From these heights, movement could be monitored. Valleys could be defended. Power could be asserted through position rather than size. What is striking is how well the platforms integrate with the island's topography. They do not impose geometry onto the land. They adapt to it. Walls curve with ridges. Terraces follow natural slopes. The builders worked with the island, not against it. This suggests long familiarity with place. The stonework also raises questions about timing. Some platforms appear to predate others, indicating phases of expansion and reinforcement. This points to evolving strategy, a society responding to changing conditions, refining its defenses over generations. Yet despite this sophistication, Rapa-Iti left no written records. Everything we know comes from stone, soil, and oral tradition. An oral tradition remembers the island as a place of struggle, of scarcity, rivalry, and resilience. The platforms were eventually abandoned. As populations declined and external contact increased, the hilltop fortifications lost their purpose. Nature reclaimed them. Vegetation crept over walls. Paths faded. From the ground, they now feel quiet, almost peaceful. But that calm is deceptive. These stones speak of urgency, of preparation, of a society that understood the importance of height, visibility, and control, concepts often associated with much larger, more centralized civilizations. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Rapa-Iti challenges a comfortable idea. That complexity only emerges in fertile, connected regions. Here, on a small, isolated island, people engineered a defensive network using nothing but stone, landscape knowledge, and collective effort. No metal, no writing, no outside support, just planning, memory, and necessity. Rapa-Iti reminds us that advanced engineering does not always express itself through monuments meant to be seen. Sometimes it hides on ridgelines, built for survival rather than admiration. And when those structures are finally noticed, centuries later, they ask an uncomfortable question. How many other islands, valleys, and mountains once held systems this complex, now softened by time and mistaken for nature? Gochang dolmens. Along the gentle hills of Western Korea, where farmland stretches quietly toward the horizon, hundreds of massive stone structures rest in plain sight. They do not hide in jungles or cling to cliffs. They sit calmly in open fields, visible, undeniable, and strangely underestimated. These are the Gochang dolmens. At first glance, a dolmen looks simple, a few upright stones, one enormous capstone laid across the top. A shape so basic it almost feels accidental. But when you step closer, the scale becomes impossible to ignore. Some of these capstones weigh more than 300 tons. They were quarried, transported, lifted, and positioned thousands of years ago, long before metal tools, wheels, or draft animals were common on the Korean peninsula. And Gochang is not a single monument. It is one of the largest concentrations of dolmens on Earth, with more than 400 spread across a relatively small area. This density changes how the site must be understood. These were not rare, ceremonial exceptions. They were standard practice. The dolmens date primarily to the Bronze Age, roughly between 1000 and 300 BCE. During this period, communities here were small, agricultural, and largely non-urban. There were no cities, no centralized states, no monumental architecture in the conventional sense. And yet, they moved stone on an industrial scale. The stones themselves are local, massive slabs of granite and other hard rock quarried from surrounding hills. Quarry marks are subtle, often erased by time, but the selection of stone shows planning. Flat surfaces were chosen. Natural fractures were exploited. Weight and balance were understood intuitively. Transporting these stones would have required coordinated labor over long distances. Logs, ropes, sledges, and earthen ramps are often proposed, but none of these methods are preserved. What remains is the result, not the process. And the result is precise. The upright stones are positioned to distribute weight evenly. Capstones rest securely without mortar, balanced in ways that resist shifting despite centuries of freeze, thaw, and seismic activity. These structures were meant to last, which raises the central question. Why invest so much effort into tombs? The prevailing interpretation is that dolmens served as burial markers for elite individuals. But the sheer number of dolmens at Gochang complicates this idea. If these were elite graves, the society would have had an unusually large elite, or a very different concept of status. Some researchers suggest the dolmens marked territorial claims, lineage boundaries, or ancestral presence rather than individual burials. In this view, the stones were not about death alone. They were about continuity, anchoring memory into the land itself. This makes sense when you consider placement. Many dolmens align along ridgelines, slopes, and natural corridors. They are visible from a distance, acting as landmarks. They shape how space is perceived and remembered. The construction methods also imply shared knowledge. Building one dolmen is difficult. Building hundreds suggests standardized techniques passed down across generations. This requires training, coordination, and cultural agreement, not improvisation. And yet, no written records describe how they were built. No diagrams survive. The knowledge existed entirely in practice. One of the most overlooked aspects of Gochang is what modern machinery reveals. When similar stones are moved today, cranes, steel cables, and reinforced platforms are required. Even with this equipment, positioning stones of comparable size is slow and risky. The Bronze Age builders achieved comparable stability using organic materials and collective effort alone. This is not primitive trial and error. It is experienced engineering. The dolmens also show variation. Some are table style, with tall uprights and elevated capstones. Others are low and compact. This suggests adaptation, different solutions to different terrain, stone availability, and purpose. Such flexibility reflects understanding, not imitation. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that seem beyond modern expectations, the Gochang dolmens challenge a deeply ingrained assumption that advanced engineering requires advanced technology. Here, precision emerges from repetition, strength from cooperation, durability from knowledge embedded in culture rather than machines. The dolmens do not tell us who the builders were. They do not explain why certain individuals or families were honored. They do not offer inscriptions or symbols. They simply remain. Row after row of stone tables, resting calmly where they were placed thousands of years ago, asking the same quiet question. If societies without metal, writing, or centralized power could organize labor on this scale, what else were they capable of that history no longer remembers? The Gochang dolmens do not shout their mystery. They sit with it, patiently, waiting for us to stop underestimating the people who built them. Sechin Bajo. In the dry coastal valleys of northern Peru, where desert meets river in narrow bands of green, lies a site that quietly disrupts one of archaeology's most comfortable assumptions. That monumental construction follows agriculture, cities, and complex states. This is Sechin Bajo. At first glance, the site appears modest. Low stone walls, shallow platforms, earth and rubble shaped into simple forms. There are no towering pyramids here, no massive monoliths demanding attention. And yet, beneath this restrained surface lies one of the oldest known examples of monumental construction in the Americas. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest phases of Sechin Bajo at more than 5,000 years old, possibly older. This predates ceramics, widespread agriculture, and even many permanent settlements in the region. And that is the problem. According to conventional models, large-scale construction requires surplus food, social hierarchy, and centralized authority. Sechin. Bajo challenges all three. The earliest builders of this site appear to have been part of small, semi-sedentary communities. There is limited evidence of intensive farming, no signs of elite residences, no defensive walls. And yet, these people organized labor to reshape the landscape itself. The core of Sechin Bajo consists of circular plazas, stone-lined platforms, and carefully arranged walls. The geometry is subtle but deliberate. Curves are maintained. Angles repeat. Spaces are defined not for habitation, but for gathering. This suggests purpose beyond survival. The construction techniques are deceptively simple. Stones were selected, placed, and stabilized using earth fill. Walls were reinforced internally, not just stacked. Load was distributed outward rather than upward, creating structures that could endure seismic activity, a constant threat in this region. This is engineering informed by experience. What makes Sechin Bajo especially intriguing is its relationship to nearby sites. In the Casma Valley, other monumental complexes, such as Cerro Sechin and Sechin Alto, appear later and on a much grander scale. Traditionally, these were seen as the beginning of complexity. Sechin Bajo reverses that narrative. It suggests that communal construction came first, before elites, before warfare, before overt displays of power. Monumentality emerged from cooperation, not coercion. One of the most striking features uncovered at Sechin Bajo is a sunken circular plaza. These plazas are found across ancient Peru, often associated with ritual activity. At Sechin Bajo, this feature appears extremely early, indicating that ceremonial space was prioritized long before residential or administrative architecture. People gathered here intentionally. They invested energy into shaping space for shared experience, perhaps seasonal rituals, social bonding, or cosmological observance. Whatever the purpose, it was important enough to justify coordinated labor across generations. And this labor left no written record. There are no inscriptions explaining belief, no carvings glorifying leaders, no imagery dictating meaning. The site communicates through layout alone. That silence is significant. It suggests a society where meaning was transmitted orally, reinforced through repeated use of space rather than text or iconography. Knowledge was embedded in movement, timing, and gathering, not in monuments meant to intimidate. Another overlooked aspect is the site's longevity. Sechin Bajo was not built once and abandoned. It was modified, expanded, and reused over centuries. Each generation added to what came before, respecting original alignments rather than replacing them. This continuity indicates long-term memory and shared tradition. Such continuity is difficult to maintain without structure, social, cultural, or spiritual. Yet it existed. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Sechin Bajo stands out because it removes technology from the equation entirely. There are no impossible stones, no mysterious tools, no lost machines. Instead, there is organization without hierarchy, engineering without agriculture, monumentality without power displays. This forces a reconsideration of what advanced really means. Perhaps advancement is not measured by metal or writing, but by the ability to bring people together around a shared purpose, and to sustain that purpose long enough to shape the land itself. Sechin Baho does not shout its importance. It whispers it, through curves in the earth, stones laid carefully by hand, and spaces designed for people to meet rather than rule. And in that whisper, it tells a story older than many civilizations we celebrate today. A story where cooperation came first, where construction preceded control, where complexity emerged quietly and was almost forgotten. Mustang Sky Caves. High above the wind-swept valleys of northern Nepal, where the Himalayas open into stark plateaus and sheer cliffs rise like walls of stone, thousands of dark openings puncture the rock face. From the valley floor, they look impossible. Small black windows suspended hundreds of feet above the ground, with no visible paths leading to them. These are the Mustang Sky Caves. They stretch across the region of Upper Mustang, carved into vertical cliffs that line the Kali Gandaki Valley. Some caves sit clustered together. Others stand completely isolated. Many are positioned so high and so precariously that reaching them even today requires ropes, scaffolding, and modern climbing equipment. And yet, people once lived here. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of these caves were occupied more than 3,000 years ago, while others were reused across centuries, as homes, burial chambers, meditation spaces, and storage sites. This was not a single project. It was a long-term engagement with the cliff itself. The first question is unavoidable. Why build here? The cliffs offer no easy access to water. Transporting food and materials upward would have been exhausting and dangerous. Daily life at this height would have required constant effort. And still, thousands of caves were carved. Not just a few shelters, but entire vertical communities. This suggests intention beyond convenience. One explanation is defense. Elevated caves are naturally protected. Attacks from below would be nearly impossible. From above, movement across the valley could be monitored. In a region that lay along ancient trade routes between Tibet and South Asia, control of visibility mattered. But defense alone does not explain the scale. Some cave complexes contain dozens of interconnected chambers. Walls were smoothed, floors leveled, internal partitions created. In several cases, wooden beams, long since decayed, once supported multi-level interiors. This was architecture, not refuge. Carving into cliff faces requires deep understanding of rock behavior. The builders had to anticipate collapse, manage debris, and ensure structural stability. Mistakes would have been fatal. Yet the caves remain intact after centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and freeze-thaw cycles. This level of success implies experience. The caves were not all built at once. Tool marks indicate phases of excavation, expansion, and modification. Some caves were enlarged long after their initial creation. Others were repurposed entirely, shifting from habitation to burial or ritual use. This adaptability reflects a living tradition. Inside certain caves, archaeologists have found human remains, textiles, manuscripts, and murals. These discoveries reveal that the caves were woven into spiritual life as much as daily survival. Some chambers were sealed intentionally, suggesting ritual closure rather than abandonment. One of the most striking aspects of the Mustang Sky Caves is their planning. Many caves align horizontally, forming levels across the cliff face. This implies coordination, builders working from scaffolding or suspended platforms, maintaining consistent elevation over long distances. Such precision is difficult even with modern tools. How did they do it? There is no evidence of metal scaffolding, no preserved lifting devices, only traces in stone that indicate careful sequencing, carving from top down, stabilizing sections before extending further. The effort required would have been enormous, and yet the caves persist across vast stretches of terrain. This was not a local experiment, it was a regional system. The cultural context adds another layer. Upper Mustang sits at the crossroads of Tibetan and Himalayan traditions. Oral histories speak of periods of conflict, isolation, and spiritual retreat. The caves may reflect all of these: defensive refuges during unstable times, hermitages for meditation, and burial places for the dead. Importantly, the caves do not privilege comfort, they privilege position. From the caves, the entire valley unfolds below. Weather patterns are visible. Travelers can be seen from miles away. The sky dominates the horizon. Life here would have been difficult, but controlled. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Mustang Sky Caves stand out because they redefine what construction looks like. There are no massive stones moved across land, no walls stacked on plains. Instead, there is vertical ambition. People chose the hardest place to build, and then built there repeatedly for centuries. This challenges the simple narrative of progress. It suggests that ancient people were not always seeking ease. Sometimes they sought advantage, isolation, or transcendence, even when it demanded extraordinary effort. The caves also remind us how much of history escapes notice. From the valley floor, they are barely visible. From the air, they appear as scars in the rock. Only up close do they reveal their complexity. And even then, many remain unexplored. Some caves are still unreachable. Others are sealed. Their contents, if any remain, lie beyond easy access, protected by height and stone. The Mustang Sky Caves do not offer clear answers. They offer persistence, evidence of humans shaping impossible spaces into places of life, death, and meaning. They ask us to reconsider what ancient engineering looked like. Not always wide, not always heavy. Sometimes vertical, carved into silence, high above the world below. Coshno Stone. On the outskirts of modern Glasgow, hidden beneath grass, soil, and deliberate burial, lies one of the most perplexing stone surfaces ever discovered in Europe. It doesn't rise above the land. It doesn't form walls or chambers. Instead, it spreads outward, flat, exposed, and densely marked. This is the Cockno Stone. When it was first uncovered in the late 19th century, researchers were stunned by what they saw. Covering nearly 100 square meters, the stone surface is carved with hundreds of symbols, spirals, concentric rings, cup marks, channels, and connecting grooves. No two sections are quite the same, yet the entire surface feels unified, intentional, and planned. This is not random carving. The Cockno Stone is one of the largest and most complex examples of prehistoric cup and ring art ever found. These markings are typically associated with the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, meaning they were carved more than 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and that immediately raises a problem. These symbols do not depict animals. They do not tell stories. They do not resemble language. They are abstract, deeply so. Each cup mark is carefully pecked into the stone, often surrounded by one or more circular rings. Some rings are linked by straight or curved channels. Others stand alone. The spacing is deliberate. Overlapping is avoided. Patterns repeat, but never exactly. This suggests planning beyond impulse. Carving into hard stone requires time, consistency, and intention. To create hundreds of such marks across a single surface would have taken years of work, possibly generations. This was not casual expression. It was commitment. The question is, commitment to what? Over the decades, theories have multiplied. Some researchers propose that the markings represent maps of land, water sources, or territorial boundaries. Others suggested astronomical symbolism, with patterns reflecting star groupings or lunar cycles. More recent, interpretations lean toward ritual or cosmological meaning, a visual language meant to be experienced rather than read. What complicates all of these theories is scale. Most rock art sites contain a handful of symbols. Cockno contains hundreds, concentrated in one place. This density implies importance. A focal point, a surface chosen for accumulation. And the surface itself matters. The stone lies relatively flat, slightly elevated above surrounding ground. From above, the patterns would be visible in full. From ground level, they disappear into abstraction. This suggests that viewing position was intentional, perhaps standing, perhaps elevated, perhaps ceremonial. Another unsettling detail is alignment. Some of the channels appear to guide water when it rains, causing liquid to trace paths across the carved surface. Cups fill and overflow. Rings glisten briefly before drying. The stone comes alive only under specific conditions. This interaction may have been the point. Water, stone, and movement combined into temporary displays. Patterns revealed not permanently, but momentarily. Meaning expressed through process rather than permanence. If so, the Cockno stone was not meant to be deciphered centuries later. It was meant to be used. That use eventually stopped. By the mid-20th century, the stone had become a target for vandalism. Modern graffiti cut across ancient carvings. To protect it, authorities made a controversial decision. They buried the Cockno stone beneath layers of soil and turf. It still lies there today, protected, preserved, and hidden. This decision adds another layer to the mystery. One of the most complex prehistoric carved surfaces ever discovered is intentionally kept out of sight. Few have seen it in person. Fewer still have studied it fully, which means its purpose remains unresolved. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Cockno stone challenges a different assumption, that complexity must be functional, structural, or monumental. Here, complexity is symbolic. The builders invested immense time and effort into something that produces no shelter, no defense, no obvious utility. Its value lay entirely in meaning shared by those who understood it and lost to those who came later. This kind of knowledge does not leave manuals. It leaves surfaces that look chaotic to outsiders but ordered to those within the culture. Surfaces that resist translation because they were never meant to be decoded by strangers in the future. The Cockno stone reminds us that prehistoric intelligence was not only practical, it was abstract, conceptual, and patient. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it suggests that entire systems of thought once existed, fully developed and deeply meaningful, that left behind no words at all, only marks, carved carefully into stone, waiting quietly beneath the ground. Takalik Abaj. On the Pacific slopes of Guatemala, where volcanic soil feeds dense vegetation and rivers descend quietly toward the sea, there is a site that feels like a hinge in time. It does not belong fully to one civilization or another. It sits in between, absorbing, adapting, and quietly transforming. This is Takalek Abaj. At first glance, the site appears restrained. Low platforms, terraces shaped into hillsides, scattered stone monuments, many weathered nearly beyond recognition. It does not overwhelm the senses, and yet Takalik Abaj holds a position in Mesoamerican history that is deeply unsettling to conventional timelines. Because here, stone speaks two languages at once. Takalik Abaj is one of the very few sites where Olmec style and early Maya style features coexist, not layered by conquest, but intertwined through time. Carvings associated with the Olmec world appear alongside some of the earliest expressions of Maya writing, calendrical thought, and ritual architecture. This is not replacement, it is transition. Radiocarbon dates suggest that Takalik Abaj was occupied for more than 1,000 years, beginning as early as 1000 BCE and continuing well into the classic Maya period. Over that span, the site evolved gradually, preserving older traditions while developing new ones. That continuity is rare. Most ancient sites show abrupt change, new rulers, new styles, new priorities. Takalik Abaj instead suggests sustained memory. Knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next, even as identity shifted. The stone monuments reveal this most clearly. Some stelae display Olmec-style reliefs, heavy forms, broad faces, and symbolic motifs associated with the Gulf Coast. Others bear early Maya glyphs, including some of the earliest known uses of long-count calendrical notation. This means something crucial. The Maya did not invent their intellectual systems in isolation. They inherited, adapted, and refined them. Takalik. A badge may represent one of the bridges through which that knowledge passed. The site's layout reinforces this idea. Terraces are aligned deliberately along natural contours, creating ceremonial pathways rather than rigid plazas. Water channels are integrated into the architecture, guiding flow through ritual spaces. Stone monuments are placed at nodal points, intersections of movement, sound, and visibility. This is not casual placement. It reflects planning rooted in long-term observation of landscape and use. One of the most overlooked aspects of Takalik Abaj is its hydraulic engineering. Channels carved into stone controlled rainwater and runoff, protecting structures while also possibly serving ritual functions. Water here was not simply managed. It was directed with intention. In many ancient cultures, water symbolized transition, renewal, and passage. At Takalik Abaj, that symbolism aligns with the site's broader role as a cultural threshold. Even the name reflects this. Takalik Abaj roughly translates to standing stone, a simple phrase that understates the complexity of what remains. Many of the stones here once stood upright, marking space and time. Some were later reshaped or repositioned, not destroyed. Respect persisted. What makes Takalik Abaj especially challenging to modern understanding is how quietly it contradicts linear history. We like to imagine civilizations rising cleanly from nothing, one replacing another. Takalik Abaj shows something messier and more human. Cultures overlap. Ideas blend. Innovation emerges gradually, not suddenly. This kind of development is difficult to see archaeologically because it leaves no dramatic rupture. Instead, it leaves continuity. And continuity is easy to miss. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Takalik Abaj stands out because its mystery is intellectual rather than mechanical. There are no impossible stones. Here, no unexplained cuts or weights. The impossibility lies in timing. This site suggests that sophisticated ideas, writing, calendrics, symbolic governance, were already forming earlier than often acknowledged, nurtured in places that did not fit neatly into later cultural labels. Takalik Abaj does not shout its importance. It whispers it, through eroded carvings, reused monuments, and pathways worn smooth by centuries of ritual movement. Standing here today, surrounded by trees and quiet earthworks, it is easy to underestimate what once took place. But that underestimation is the point, because some of the most important moments in human history were not marked by collapse or conquest, but by careful transmission. Ideas passed hand to hand, stone reused rather than replaced, meaning preserved through adaptation. Takalik Abaj reminds us that history is not a series of clean breaks. It is a continuum. And sometimes, the most advanced achievements of the ancient world occurred not at the height of empire, but in the spaces between, where cultures met, learned, and slowly became something new. Gabel el Silsila, quarry. Along a narrow bend of the Nile, where the river tightens between sandstone cliffs, there is a place that supplied stone to an empire, yet remains strangely overlooked compared to the monuments it made possible. This is Gabel el Silsila. Unlike temples or pyramids, Gabel el Silsila was never meant to impress. It was meant to work. For centuries, this stretch of riverbank served as one of ancient Egypt's primary sources of sandstone, feeding construction projects across the kingdom. Temples at Karnak, Luxor, and beyond owe their existence to this quiet corridor of rock. But when you walk among the quarry walls themselves, something becomes clear. This was not primitive extraction. The cliffs are cut with precision. Vertical faces are smooth and deliberate. Rectangular blocks were removed in orderly sequences, leaving behind clean negative spaces. Stone volumes extracted with intent, not hacked free by chance. The scale is immense. Entire cliff. Faces were reshaped. Stone was removed in quantities that rival modern industrial quarrying, all without explosives, steel machinery, or powered tools. The organization required to manage this work is difficult to overstate. Quarrying is not just cutting stone. It requires planning extraction order, managing stress fractures, preventing collapse, and ensuring that blocks can be removed intact. A single misjudgment can shatter weeks of labor. At Gebel El Silsila, mistakes are rare. Tool marks remain visible on many surfaces: parallel grooves, consistent angles, repeated patterns. These marks show controlled force applied evenly across the stone, suggesting standardized techniques shared among workers. This was knowledge, not improvisation. One of the most revealing aspects of the site is what was left behind. Incomplete blocks remain embedded in the rock, abandoned mid-extraction. Some were nearly free, held only by narrow stone bridges. Their presence allows us to see the quarrying process frozen in time, how channels were cut, how leverage points were planned, how blocks were separated cleanly from bedrock. The precision required to do this repeatedly is striking. Sandstone may be softer than granite, but it fractures unpredictably. Extracting large blocks without splitting them demands intimate familiarity with the stone's grain, weaknesses, and limits. This familiarity came from experience, accumulated over generations. Gebel El Silsila was not a one-time project. It was active across multiple dynasties. Techniques were refined, not reinvented. Quarry faces show phases of use, with earlier cuts respected and extended rather than erased. This continuity suggests an institutional memory, a workforce trained through apprenticeship, passing down methods orally and practically. The quarry was also deeply integrated into the Nile itself. Stone blocks were extracted directly beside the river, minimizing overland transport. Once freed, blocks could be slid or rolled onto barges and carried downstream with the current. This logistical efficiency reflects systems thinking, aligning extraction, transport, and construction into a single flow. Such coordination does not emerge accidentally. It requires foresight. The site also contains shrines, inscriptions, and carved reliefs, subtle reminders that quarrying was not merely labor. It was ritualized. Workers left offerings. Officials marked authority. The act of removing stone from the earth carried symbolic weight. Stone was not inert material. It was transformed. What makes Gebel El Silsila especially relevant in a series about prehistoric structures beyond modern expectations is how much modern observers underestimate extraction itself. We marvel at temples. We photograph monuments. But we rarely consider the engineering that happens before construction begins. Without Gebel El Silsila, much of ancient Egypt's architecture would not exist. And yet, the quarry demonstrates a level of planning, efficiency, and precision that rivals later industrial operations, achieved entirely with human labor, simple tools, and deep material knowledge. There are no legends here, no lost machines, no fantastical explanations, just evidence. Evidence that ancient societies mastered not only building, but supply chains, workforce organization, and large-scale material processing. In that sense, Gebel El Silsila may be more unsettling than any monument, because it shows that advanced capability was not confined to sacred spaces or elite projects. It extended into infrastructure, into systems designed to operate reliably, repeatedly, and at scale. Standing between the carved cliffs today, with the Nile flowing quietly beside you, it becomes clear that history often hides its greatest achievements in plain sight. Not at the end of effort, but at the beginning. Gebel El Silsila reminds us that before stone could rise into temples and statues, it had to be understood, separated, and moved with confidence. And that confidence, carved into the quarry walls, still speaks. Yap stone money sites. In the western Pacific Ocean, scattered across a small cluster of islands, lies one of the most conceptually advanced systems ever created by a non-industrial society. It doesn't rely on metal, paper, or numbers. It doesn't even require movement. And yet, it worked. For centuries. These are the Yap stone money sites. On the island of Yap, massive circular stones, known as rai, rest quietly along paths, village edges, and clearings. Some are small enough to lift with effort. Others are so large they weigh several tons. Most have a hole carved through the center. Not for decoration, but for transport. What makes these stones extraordinary is not their size alone. It is what they represent. The Uri stones functioned as currency, not by being exchanged physically, but by being recognized socially. Ownership was remembered, witnessed, and agreed upon by the community. A stone could change hands without ever moving. Its value was carried in, collective memory. This alone challenges modern assumptions about economics. But the deeper mystery lies in how the stones were made and brought to Yap in the first place. The stone used for Rai does not come from Yap. It comes primarily from Palau, an island group more than 400 kilometers away across open ocean. This means the stones were quarried abroad, shaped there, and then transported by sea on wooden vessels, long before modern navigation tools. Some of the largest Rai stones weigh over 4 tons. Transporting such weight across open water using only wind, paddles, and balance would be risky even today. Doing it repeatedly across generations implies deep maritime knowledge and confidence. And yet, they did. The quarries in Palau still exist. Massive circular cutouts remain in the rock faces, negative spaces where stones were removed. Tool marks show steady abrasion and controlled shaping, not chaotic breakage. The work was slow, deliberate, and skilled. Once shaped, the stones were lashed to rafts or canoes and floated back across the ocean. Losses occurred. Some stones sank. And when they did, something remarkable happened. They retained their value. If a stone sank during transport, but its story was known and witnessed, it could still be considered valid currency. Its worth was tied not to possession, but to narrative. Who made it, how it was obtained, and what it represented. This is a level of abstraction rarely credited to prehistoric or non-industrial societies. The Yapes understood that value is social agreement. The stones were placed along paths and village boundaries, not hidden or guarded. Their visibility reinforced trust. Everyone knew which stones belonged to whom. Disputes were resolved through memory and consensus, not enforcement. This system endured for generations without centralized authority. From an engineering perspective, the RII stones are equally unsettling. Carving large, symmetrical discs from hard limestone requires control and patience. Creating a central hole without fracturing the stone is especially difficult. The uniformity of many stones suggests standardized methods, techniques shared and refined over time. And yet, there are no written instructions. Knowledge moved orally, skills passed hand to hand, errors corrected through experience. The placement of stones on Yap also reveals planning. Many are positioned deliberately at crossroads, village entrances, or ceremonial spaces. They mark territory, lineage, and exchange networks. The landscape itself became a ledger, a physical record of social relationships. Nothing about this system is accidental. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Yap stone money sites challenge a different kind of assumption, that sophistication must look technological. Here, complexity is cognitive. The Yapes combined long-distance quarrying, open ocean transport, precision, stonework, and abstract economic thought into a single system, without metal tools, writing, or centralized institutions. This was not primitive, it was elegant. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it worked better than many modern systems precisely because it relied on shared understanding rather than constant enforcement. Today, many RII stones remain where they were placed centuries ago. They are no longer used as currency, but they still hold meaning. They are respected. They are remembered. They do not need to be moved to matter. The Yap stone money sites remind us that ancient innovation did not always aim to dominate nature or outpace technology. Sometimes it aimed to align human behavior, to create systems where trust, memory, and material work together seamlessly. And when those systems succeed, they leave behind something rare. Not ruins of collapse, but evidence of balance. Stone discs resting quietly in the shade. Paths that once carried meaning, instead of numbers. And a reminder that the past often understood things we are still struggling to relearn. Beglik Tash. On a quiet stretch of Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, where forested hills meet open sky, a cluster of massive stones rests in deliberate stillness. They are not stacked into walls. They are not carved into monuments. Instead, they are positioned, carefully, precisely, as if the land itself were arranged into a device. This is Beglik Tash. At first glance, the stones appear natural, rounded granite boulders scattered across a clearing. But as you move through the site, patterns begin to emerge. Narrow passages, framed openings, stones placed at measured distances, creating corridors of light and shadow that only align at specific times. This is not coincidence. Beglik Tash is believed to be a prehistoric megalithic sanctuary used as early as the late Bronze Age, and possibly much earlier. Long before written records in this region, people were coming here, not to build upward, but to organize space. The stones themselves are enormous. Some weigh tens of tons, yet they are positioned with surprising balance. Large slabs rest on small contact points. Gaps are maintained intentionally. The builders understood weight, center of gravity, and stability. Concepts that do not require mathematics on paper, but demand deep physical intuition. One of the most striking features of Beglik Tash is its apparent astronomical function. Several stone alignments correspond to the position of the sun during solstices and equinoxes. At specific moments of the year, sunlight passes through narrow gaps, illuminating particular stones or casting shadows that align perfectly with others. This requires accuracy. To achieve this, the builders needed long-term observation of the sun's movement across the horizon. Seasonal change had to be tracked over many years. The placement of each stone had to be final. Once set, it could not be adjusted easily. Stone does not forgive error. Beglik Tash also incorporates natural rock formations into its design. Rather than quarrying new stones, the builders selected existing boulders and repositioned them. This choice reflects a philosophy of collaboration with the landscape rather than domination over it. The site feels open, exposed to sky and weather. There is no enclosure, no barrier between ritual space and nature. Whatever happened here was meant to occur under the sun, not hidden behind walls. Archaeological finds at Beglik Tash include fragments of pottery, animal remains, and tools, evidence of repeated human presence. This was not a one-time experiment. It was a place returned to across generations. And yet, there are no inscriptions. No symbols explain purpose. No carvings identify deities. The stones communicate only through position and alignment. This silence is deliberate. Beglik Tash appears to have functioned as a ritual calendar, a place where time itself was observed and marked. For societies dependent on seasonal cycles, this knowledge was critical. Agriculture, migration, and ritual all depended on understanding when the year turned. But Beglik Tash goes further. Some alignments suggest not only solar observation, but lunar and stellar awareness. The sanctuary may have tracked multiple cycles simultaneously, integrating them into a single spatial system. This level of complexity challenges the idea that prehistoric societies lacked abstract planning. Here, planning is expressed physically. You do not read Beglik Tash. You walk through it. You experience it. The stones guide movement. They frame the sky. They shape perception. Meaning emerges through participation rather than explanation. What makes Beglik Tash especially difficult to categorize is its restraint. There is no excess, no ornamentation, no visible hierarchy. Nothing marks one individual above another. The site is communal, open, and experiential. This suggests a worldview where knowledge was shared, not controlled. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Beglik Tash reminds us that sophistication does not always announce itself through monumentality. Sometimes it is embedded quietly into the landscape, visible only to those who know when and where to look. The sanctuary does not impress through size. It impresses through timing. Standing among the stones today, the experience feels calm rather than mysterious. There is no sense of spectacle, only alignment, stone, light, and space briefly agreeing. And perhaps that was the point. Beglik Tash shows us that long before formal observatories, before written calendars, people were already shaping environments to measure time itself, using nothing but stone, memory, and patience. These stones were not meant to be decoded by distant observers thousands of years later. They were meant to work. And the fact that they still align, still perform, is what makes Beglik Tash one of the quietest and most convincing demonstrations of prehistoric intelligence. Mount Nemrut East Terrace. High in southeastern Turkey, where the land rises into a lonely mountain crowned with stone, there is a place designed not for crowds, but for moments. It sits above the valleys, above the noise of daily life, exposed to wind, cold, and sky. This is the East Terrace of Mount Nemrut. Unlike cities built for permanence and use, Mount Nemrut was built for alignment, with the horizon, with the sun, and with time itself. Reaching the summit requires effort even today. In antiquity, the journey would have been slow, deliberate, and symbolic. Nothing about this place is accidental. The East Terrace faces the rising sun. At dawn, light spills across a carefully arranged platform, illuminating colossal stone figures seated in silent order. Gods, animals, and a king, all carved at monumental scale, all positioned to witness the same event each morning. The sun rises, stone watches. At the center of Mount Nemrut lies a massive tumulus, a mountain of crushed stone piled tens of meters high. It is not decorative, it is deliberate. The tumulus conceals something, most likely a burial chamber, though none has ever been conclusively found. Despite decades of study, the interior remains inaccessible. This alone is unsettling. The site was constructed in the 1st century BCE by King Antiochus III of Commagene, a ruler of a small but strategically positioned kingdom. Antiochus left inscriptions explaining his intent: to unite Greek and Persian traditions, to place himself among the gods, and to be remembered beyond death. But the engineering goes far beyond self-promotion. The East Terrace statues were carved from local limestone blocks, each weighing several tons. They were transported uphill, positioned precisely, and assembled into seated figures over 9 meters tall. The heads alone weigh more than a modern car. And yet, the placement is exact. Each figure aligns with the terrace axis. Spacing is consistent. Sightlines are controlled. When the sun rises on specific dates, shadows fall in predictable ways across the platform. This requires planning. The East Terrace was not simply decorated, it was calibrated. What makes this especially striking is the environment. At this altitude, winters are brutal. Snow, ice, and extreme temperature changes are constant. Stone shifts, mortar fails. And yet, the terrace remains largely intact more than 2,000 years later. The builders understood the mountain. They constructed terraces that drain naturally. They accounted for expansion and contraction. They chose stone sizes that could settle without collapsing. This is mountain engineering, not imitation of lowland architecture. One of the most haunting aspects of the East Terrace is its stillness. Unlike temples meant for regular worship, Mount Nemrut does not show signs of daily use. There are no surrounding settlements, no infrastructure for crowds. This was a destination, not a center. It was meant to be visited rarely, perhaps only during specific ceremonies tied to the solar calendar. That rarity matters. The East Terrace functions best at sunrise. Before the light arrives, the statues are silhouettes. As the sun crests the horizon, faces emerge slowly from shadow. Stone appears to wake. This effect is temporary. Miss the moment, and it is gone. This tells us something about intention. The builders were not chasing permanence alone. They were designing experience. Brief, precise, and unforgettable. Even the later damage to the site reinforces this idea. Earthquakes toppled the statues' heads, which now rest on the ground before the bodies. Modern viewers often see this as ruin, but the alignment still works. The sun still rises. The light still moves across the terrace. The system still functions. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, The East Terrace of Mount Nemrut challenges the idea that advanced planning belongs only to large empires. Here, a relatively small kingdom executed one of the most ambitious high-altitude ceremonial complexes in the ancient world, integrating astronomy, symbolism, engineering, and landscape into a single composition. No part stands alone. The mountain is the monument. The sun is the mechanism. Stone is the medium. Standing on the East Terrace today, with wind pressing against silence, it becomes clear that Mount Nemrut was never meant to dominate its surroundings. It was meant to converse with them, sky answering stone, light answering form. And perhaps that is why it endures so powerfully, because it does not argue with time. It waits for it. Balochistan stone alignments. Across the dry plateaus and deserts of Balochistan, where the land stretches wide and the horizon rarely breaks, lines of stone lie scattered in quiet formation. They do not rise into monuments. They do not announce themselves with size or decoration. Most are only noticed from above. Thin lines, arcs, and clusters etched lightly into an immense landscape. These are the Balochistan stone alignments. From ground level, they are easy to miss. Low stones placed end to end, occasional circles, long straight rows that seem to go nowhere. But aerial surveys and satellite imagery have revealed something far more deliberate. Patterns extending across kilometers, repeating in orientation and form. This is not random placement. The alignments appear in remote regions far from modern settlements, roads, or water sources. Some run parallel to one another. Others converge at specific points. In places, stone circles anchor the ends of long linear paths, suggesting nodes rather than destinations. Their age remains uncertain. Very few of these sites have been excavated. The region's remoteness, political instability, and sheer scale have kept systematic study limited. But surface weathering, patina, and context suggest significant antiquity, possibly dating back to the prehistoric period. What complicates interpretation is what these alignments are not. They are not defensive walls. They are not field boundaries. They are not animal traps in any conventional sense. They do not enclose space efficiently. They do not block movement. They do not follow topography in ways that would make practical sense for everyday use. Instead, they follow direction. Many alignments maintain consistent orientation over long distances, cutting across subtle rises and depressions rather than adapting to them. This implies that direction mattered more than convenience. Direction toward what? Some researchers have suggested astronomical intent, alignments oriented toward sunrise or sunset on particular days, or toward a prominent stars. In open desert landscapes, the sky dominates experience. Tracking celestial movement would have been easier here than almost anywhere else. Others propose ceremonial pathways, routes walked during ritual processions, marking journeys rather than destinations. In this view, movement itself was the purpose. Stone marks memory. Another possibility is territorial signaling. Not boundaries meant to stop movement, but markers meant to be seen. Lines visible from a distance, communicating presence, identity, or shared understanding across vast spaces. This kind of signaling would make sense in a landscape where groups moved seasonally, returning to familiar routes rather than fixed settlements. What is striking is the labor involved. Even simple stone placement requires time and repetition. To lay lines stretching for hundreds of meters, sometimes kilometers, demands coordination and shared intent. Someone decided where each stone should go. Someone ensured the line stayed straight. This is planning without permanence. Unlike walls or buildings, these alignments offer no shelter and no storage. Their value lay entirely in meaning understood by those who built and used them. And that meaning has not survived. No oral traditions remain to explain them. No inscriptions name them. No later cultures repurpose them in obvious ways. They were left where they were placed, slowly blending back into the desert. This disappearance of context is what makes the Balochistan stone alignments so unsettling. They suggest that entire systems of knowledge once existed, systems focused on orientation, movement, and space. that left behind only minimal physical traces. We are used to reading history through architecture, walls, rooms, and foundations. These alignments reject that framework. They exist at landscape scale. They make sense only when viewed, from above or over long distances. They may have been designed to be experienced over time, not seen all at once. This kind of thinking feels surprisingly modern. It anticipates aerial perspective. It values pattern over object. It prioritizes relationship rather than structure. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Balochistan stone alignments stand out precisely because they are so restrained. They do not impress through mass. They impress through consistency, stone after stone, line after line, direction held across empty land. Standing among them today, the silence is total. Wind moves, heat shimmers. The stones say nothing. And yet, their presence insists on something important. That ancient people were not only builders of things, but designers of space. That meaning could be stretched across landscapes, not locked into monuments. And that some of the most ambitious human projects were never meant to endure in obvious ways. They were meant to be walked, to be followed, to be known, and then forgotten. The Balochistan stone alignments remain one of those quiet traces. Not ruins of collapse, but echoes of intention, still pointing in the same directions they always have, long after their purpose slipped beyond memory. Chillicothe earthworks. In the rolling river valleys of southern Ohio, where the Scioto River curves gently through farmland and forest, there once existed a landscape shaped on a scale that is still difficult to comprehend. Today, most of it is gone, leveled, plowed, built over. But what remains, recorded in maps and fragments of earth, points to one of the most ambitious prehistoric engineering projects in North America. These are the Chillicothe earthworks. Long before modern cities, long before roads or survey tools, the Hopewell culture transformed this region into a network of massive geometric forms, circles, squares, octagons, and long earthen walls stretching across the landscape. These were not isolated mounds. They were part of an integrated system, carefully spaced and deliberately aligned. From the ground, the earthworks appeared subtle, low embankments rising only a few meters high, wide enclosures that felt more open than enclosed, but from above, from a perspective the builders themselves never physically possessed. The geometry becomes unmistakable. Precision emerges. Some earthworks near Chillicothe formed near-perfect circles hundreds of meters in diameter. Others combined squares and circles connected by straight causeways. Measurements reveal consistent proportions, repeated across sites separated by miles. This is not coincidence. Maintaining straight lines over long distances without modern instruments is extremely difficult. Keeping curves smooth and symmetrical requires constant correction. Doing both simultaneously, across multiple sites, implies a shared measurement system and disciplined execution. And yet, the Hopewell people left no written language. Their knowledge existed entirely in practice. The Chillicothe region appears to have been a ceremonial core of the Hopewell world, active between roughly 100 BCE and 500 CE. People traveled here from vast distances. Artifacts found within the earthworks include obsidian from Yellowstone, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, and mica from the Appalachian Mountains. This was not a local culture, it was a continental network. The earthworks themselves do not show signs of permanent habitation. There are no dense clusters of homes inside them. Instead, they seem to have functioned as gathering places, locations where people assembled periodically for ritual, exchange, and shared experience. The scale of labor involved is staggering. Millions of cubic feet of earth were moved using baskets and hand tools. Soil was selected, transported, and layered deliberately. Embankments were shaped to precise heights and widths. Causeways aligned openings across vast spaces. This required coordination over generations. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Chillicothe earthworks is their astronomical alignment. Certain complexes appear oriented toward lunar standstills, rare events that occur only once every 18.6, years. Tracking such cycles requires long-term observation across multiple generations. This is patience encoded into earth. Unlike stone monuments, earthworks demand maintenance. Without care, they erode. The fact that these forms remained functional for centuries suggests repeated upkeep, people returning again and again to restore, reshape, and preserve the geometry. Meaning was reinforced through repetition. What makes this especially difficult to reconcile is the absence of hierarchy. There are no palaces, no royal tombs, no statues of rulers. The earthworks do not glorify individuals. They glorify order, geometry, alignment, and shared space. This implies leadership without dominance, organization without kings. The Chillicothe earthworks also challenge a modern bias, the idea that sophistication must be visible, vertical, and built of stone. Here, sophistication is horizontal. It spreads outward. It reveals itself only when context is restored, and much of that context is gone. More than 90% of Ohio's earthworks were destroyed during the 19th and early 20th centuries, erased by agriculture and development before their significance was understood. What we know today comes from early surveys, drawings, and the fragments that survived by chance. This loss makes the remaining evidence even more haunting, because what survives suggests that prehistoric North America hosted large-scale planning traditions capable of shaping entire regions, not just single monuments. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Chillicothe earthworks stand as one of the clearest examples of intelligence expressed without stone, metal, or writing. Here, knowledge is embedded in distance, in proportion, in orientation. It is knowledge meant to be walked, not read. Standing on what remains of these embankments today, it is hard to imagine the full scope of what once existed. But that absence is part of the story. The earthworks were not meant to last forever. They were meant to function while memory lived. And when that memory faded, the earth slowly returned to itself, leaving behind only faint traces of a society that understood space, time, and cooperation at a level history once refused to recognize. Coba-Sac-Beob. In the dense forests of the northern Yucatan, where limestone ground hides beneath roots and vines, a network of ancient roads cuts silently through the jungle. They are not paths worn by chance. They are not trails formed by repeated travel. They are built. These are the Sac-Beob of Coba. Elevated stone roads engineered with a level of ambition that feels startling for the ancient world. The word Sacbe means white road in Maya, a reference to the pale limestone plaster that once coated their surfaces. When newly finished, these roads would have glowed in moonlight, stretching straight through forest and wetland like illuminated lines across the land. Coba was one of the most powerful Maya cities of its time. At its height, it controlled a vast region, not through walls or armies alone, but through connection. And the Sac-Bay network was how that connection worked. Unlike simple causeways, Coba's Sac-Beob extend for extraordinary distances. One road runs more than 100 kilometers, linking Coba to the distant city of Yaxuna, a journey that cuts straight through jungle, swamps, and uneven terrain. Straight is the key word. The road does not bend to follow natural contours. It does not avoid obstacles. It maintains direction with stubborn consistency, rising above low ground on stone embankments and slicing through the landscape as if the terrain were secondary. This kind of construction is not intuitive. Building straight lines over long distances without modern surveying tools requires planning, alignment techniques, and constant correction. Errors accumulate quickly. And yet, the Sac-Beob hold their course. The roads themselves are massive. They are elevated several meters above the surrounding ground, built from layers of stone fill, rubble, and plastered surfaces. This elevation protected them from seasonal flooding and made travel reliable year-round, a critical advantage in the Yucatan's shifting climate. Moving this volume of material required enormous labor. Millions of stones had to be quarried, transported, and placed by hand. Lime plaster had to be produced by burning limestone, a process that consumes vast amounts of fuel and time. And all of this was done repeatedly, across multiple roads, extending outward from Koba like spokes. This was infrastructure on a regional scale. What makes the Koba Sac Bay network especially unsettling is that it was not strictly practical. Some roads lead to major cities. Others terminate at smaller sites, cenotes, or ceremonial locations. A few end abruptly, with no obvious destination at all. This suggests that Sakbiob were not just for transport, they were symbolic. In Maya cosmology, roads represented connection between worlds, linking cities, ancestors, gods, and sacred places. Walking a sack bay was not simply travel. It was participation in a ritualized landscape. The whiteness of the roads reinforces this idea. Covered in bright limestone plaster. The sack biab would have stood out against dark forest, especially at night. Movement along them would have been visible, deliberate, and communal. These were processional routes. The planning required to integrate ritual meaning with functional engineering is easy to underestimate. The builders had to consider load-bearing capacity, drainage, alignment, visibility, and symbolism, all at once. And they did so without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or draft animals. The Sakbi network also reveals political intent. By linking distant sites directly to Koba, the city asserted influence across vast territory. Roads shaped movement, trade, communication, and allegiance. Control of infrastructure became control of region. This is statecraft expressed in stone and lime. What is especially striking is how early some of these roads appear to be. Portions of the network date back to periods when the Maya world was still forming its political structures. This suggests that large-scale planning preceded, and perhaps enabled, later complexity. The roads came first, the power followed. Much of the Sakbe network remains hidden today, buried beneath jungle and soil. LiDAR surveys have revealed segments previously unknown, long, straight embankments invisible at ground level. This means we are still discovering the system, and that incompleteness matters, because every new segment reinforces the same conclusion. The Maya were not only master builders of temples and pyramids, they were planners of space on a regional scale. They thought in distances, in connections, in systems. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Koba Sakba network challenges the assumption that ancient infrastructure must look primitive. These roads were engineered for durability, visibility, and meaning. They reshape the landscape in ways that still guide movement today, even when the road itself is hidden. Standing on a surviving Sakbe segment now, the jungle pressing in on all sides, it is easy to forget that this was once a bright, elevated highway, connecting people across hundreds of kilometers. But the stone beneath your feet remembers. It remembers a world where movement was intentional, connection was sacred, and engineering served both power and belief. And it reminds us that some of the most advanced achievements of the ancient world were not built upward into the sky, but outward, across the land, binding entire regions together in quiet, enduring lines. 8 Ben Hadu. At the edge of the Sahara, where the high Atlas Mountains descend into dry river valleys, a fortified settlement rises from the earth as if it grew there naturally. Most people notice its towers, its stacked houses, its dramatic silhouette against the desert sky. But the true strength of Ait Ben Hadu is not what rises above the ground. It is what lies beneath. Long before the mud brick walls and red earthen towers took their present form, Ait Ben Hadu was anchored by stone foundations carefully laid into the hillside. These foundations are older, quieter, and far more revealing than the structures they support. They tell a story of engineering shaped by environment, not domination over it. Ait Ben Hadu is a Xar, a fortified village built along ancient trans-Saharan trade routes. Caravans carrying salt, gold, and goods passed through this valley for centuries. The settlement needed to endure heat, flash floods, erosion, and time itself. Mud brick alone would not survive that. So the builders began with stone. At the base of the Xar, thick stone foundations follow the natural slope of the land. They are not perfectly horizontal. They step, curve, and adjust, distributing weight across uneven ground. This flexibility is intentional. It allows the structure to move slightly without collapsing. This is seismic thinking without equations. The stones used are local, gathered from the surrounding riverbeds and hills. They are irregular in shape but placed with care, locked together through pressure rather than mortar. Voids are filled strategically. Load transfers downward and outward. Above these stone bases, earthen walls could rise safely. This combination is key. Stone resists water and pressure. Earth regulates temperature and is easy to repair. Together, they form a hybrid system optimized for desert life. What makes the foundations especially intriguing is their age. While much of the visible Ksar dates to the medieval period, archaeological evidence suggests that the site itself was occupied far earlier. Foundations were reused, reinforced, and built upon across generations. New walls rose where old ones once stood. The base endured. The surface changed. This continuity reveals long-term planning rather than short-term construction. Builders understood that permanence in this environment comes from adaptability, not rigidity. The foundations also function as flood control. Ait Ben Hadu sits beside the Onila River, which can transform from dry bed to violent torrent during rare but intense rains. The stone base acts as armor, deflecting water and preventing erosion from undermining the settlement. Without these foundations, the Ksar would not exist, and yet they are rarely discussed. Most narratives focus on Ait Ben Hadu as a cinematic backdrop or architectural curiosity. Few examine the engineering logic that allowed it to survive centuries of environmental stress. That logic is prehistoric in spirit. It relies on observation rather than calculation, on memory rather than manuals, on knowledge passed through building, not writing. The builders may not have used metal reinforcement or concrete, but they understood forces just as clearly. Weight, water, heat, movement. They built accordingly. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the foundations of Ait Ben Hadu remind us that sophistication is not always visible. Sometimes it is buried, doing its work silently while attention drifts upward. Modern construction often separates form and function. Here, they are inseparable. The settlement looks the way it does because the foundations demand it. As materials weathered, walls were rebuilt. Towers collapsed and were raised again. But the stone base remained, guiding every future decision. Standing at ground level today, touching those stones, you are touching the oldest and most intelligent part of the site. Not the symbol, not the facade, the system. Ait Ben Hadu's foundations challenge a common misunderstanding, that ancient builders lacked foresight. In reality, they built for failure. They expected erosion. They planned for collapse and renewal. That mindset is rare today, and perhaps that is why these foundations still hold. They were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to last. Sardinian giants' tombs. Across the rugged interior of Sardinia, where wind moves through low scrub and stone outcrops punctuate the hills, long curved monuments rest close to the ground. They do not dominate the skyline. They do not reach upward. Instead, they stretch outward, wide, deliberate, and heavy with silence. These are the Sardinian giants' tombs. Their local name, Tombe dei Giganti, does not come from evidence of enormous skeletons, but from scale and presence. Each tomb consists of a long burial chamber built from massive stone slabs, fronted by a monumental curved facade that resembles a pair of open arms. This shape is not accidental. The facade widens at the base and narrows toward the top, creating a sense of enclosure and focus. At its center is a small opening, a symbolic doorway, leading into the collective tomb behind it. These were not graves for individuals. They were graves for communities. Dating primarily to the Bronze Age, around 1800 to 1200 BCE, the giants' tombs are associated with the Nuragic culture, a society best known for its stone towers, or nuraga, that still dot the island. But the tombs reveal a different side of Nuragic thinking. While towers rise and fortify, the tombs gather and contain. The construction itself is deceptively simple and deeply sophisticated. Large stone slabs form the walls and roof of the burial chamber. Smaller stones fill gaps and stabilize the structure. Weight is distributed laterally rather than vertically, allowing the tombs to endure centuries of seismic activity and weather. This is load management without formulas. Many capstones weigh several tons. Quarrying, transporting, and positioning them required coordinated labor and practiced technique. The stones were set with such precision that some tombs remain structurally sound even after millennia of exposure. No mortar was needed. The chamber interiors are narrow, elongated, and intentionally dark. Entering. One today, the sound of the outside world fades quickly. The space absorbs noise. It feels insulated, separated. This sensory design matters. The tombs were likely sites of repeated ritual activity, not sealed graves visited once and forgotten. Remains were placed, rearranged, and revisited over generations. The dead remained present within the living landscape. This continuity challenges a modern idea of burial as final. For the Nuragic people, death appears to have been collective and ongoing, part of social identity rather than its end. The orientation of many giants' tombs adds another layer of meaning. Several are aligned toward sunrise, particularly during certain seasons. Light would briefly touch the facade or entrance at specific times of year, illuminating stone before retreating again. This suggests awareness of cycles: life, death, return. The tombs were often placed near settlements, not hidden away. They were visible reminders of ancestry, grounding, communities and shared past rather than individual legacy. What is especially striking is how standardized the form becomes across Sardinia. Hundreds of giants' tombs exist, spread across diverse terrain, yet sharing consistent features: curved facades, central stelae, elongated chambers. This consistency implies shared belief and shared technique across large distances. Knowledge traveled, but not in writing. Everything was transmitted through practice, through building, ritual, and repetition. The tombs themselves became teachers, showing each generation how to honor the dead and shape stone accordingly. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Sardinian giants' tombs stand out because their sophistication is social rather than technological. They do not astonish through impossible cuts or extreme heights. They astonish through coordination, through the ability of a society to agree on form, meaning, and effort across centuries. Modern societies struggle to maintain continuity for decades. These people maintained it for generations. Standing before a giant's tomb today, the impression is not fear or awe, but gravity. The stone feels intentional. The space feels prepared. Nothing is wasted. These monuments were built not to be admired, but to be returned to. Again, and again, and again. They remind us that prehistoric intelligence often expressed itself through relationships between living and dead, stone and land, memory and place. And that sometimes the most enduring structures are not those built to reach the sky, but those built to hold a community together long after individual voices have fallen silent. Teotihuacan Subterranean Tunnel. Beneath one of the largest ancient cities ever built in the Americas, there is a space that was never meant to be seen by crowds. It lies hidden under stone and earth, sealed carefully, deliberately, and for a very long time. This is the subterranean tunnel of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan rises on the surface as a city of scale: wide avenues, towering pyramids, and rigid geometry stretching across the valley. From above, it feels ordered and monumental. But beneath that order, something else exists: a passageway carved into the earth. The tunnel was discovered beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, one of Teotihuacan's most symbolically charged structures. It runs more than 100 meters long, descending deep below the surface, ending in chambers that were intentionally filled and sealed sometime around 250 CE. This was not a secret tunnel in the modern sense. It was a ritual space. The walls of the passage were carved through volcanic rock, then carefully shaped. The ceiling was stabilized, the floor leveled. This was not a natural cave reused by chance. It was excavated with purpose, and that purpose appears to have been symbolic rather than practical. The tunnel leads toward 3 chambers at its far end, arranged in a way that mirrors cosmological concepts found throughout Mesoamerica. Many researchers believe the tunnel represented the underworld, a liminal space between life and creation. What was found inside supports this idea. Archaeologists uncovered thousands of offerings placed along the tunnel floor: obsidian blades, carved shells, jade objects, pottery, and liquid mercury, a substance rarely found in ancient contexts. The mercury likely represented water or reflective surfaces, possibly meant to simulate rivers or lakes of the underworld. Even more striking were traces of metallic pyrite. Pyrite was once used to coat surfaces within the chambers, creating a shimmering effect when illuminated by torchlight. Imagine entering a deep underground space where walls glint like stars, reflecting flickering light in total darkness. This was not accidental atmosphere. It was engineered experience. The tunnel also contained carefully placed stone spheres, some coated with the same reflective minerals. Their arrangement suggests deliberate placement, not random deposition. Everything inside the tunnel was positioned with intent. Nothing was left behind casually. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the tunnel is its closure. After the final offerings were placed, the entire passage was filled in, sealed completely. This was not abandonment, it was completion. The space had served its purpose and was closed to the living world. For nearly 2,000 years, it remained untouched. This raises a profound question. Why invest so much labor into creating a space meant to be used briefly, and then erased? The answer may lie in how Teotihuacan understood power. Unlike later Mesoamerican cities, Teotihuacan shows little evidence of individual rulers celebrated through statues or tombs. Authority appears collective, symbolic, and ritualized. Power was embedded in space rather than person. The subterranean tunnel fits this pattern. It was not a place for residence, not a place for display. It was a place for transition. By carving downward, the builders created a physical descent mirroring a spiritual one. Movement through the tunnel would have been slow, controlled, and sensory. Darkness, echo, reflection, and silence shaping perception. This required advanced planning. Excavating such a tunnel without collapse demands understanding of geology and load. Ventilation, lighting, debris removal, all had to be managed. Mistakes underground are unforgiving. And yet, the tunnel holds. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Teotihuacan subterranean tunnel stands out because it inverts our idea of monumentality. The most important space was not the pyramid above, but the void below. The builders understood that meaning does not always rise. Sometimes it descends. Standing on the surface today, among tourists and sunlight, it is difficult to imagine the world beneath your feet. Sealed chambers, dark passages, offerings placed carefully and then hidden forever. But that hiddenness is the message. Some knowledge was never meant to endure publicly. Some rituals were meant to vanish once completed. Some spaces were powerful precisely because they were closed. The Teotihuacan tunnel reminds us that ancient engineering was not only about construction, but about control over experience, perception, and memory, and that some of the most advanced ideas of the ancient world were buried on purpose, waiting quietly beneath the stones, long after the city above fell silent. Kalibangan, fire altars. On the dry banks of the Gaga River in present-day Rajasthan, beneath layers of wind-blown sand and silence, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected. Not palaces, not monumental towers, but rows of carefully constructed fire altars, arranged with such consistency that chance can be ruled out completely. This is Kalibangan. Unlike many Indus Valley sites, Kalibangan does not impress through size alone. It unsettles through repetition. Excavations revealed a series of fire altars built within domestic and ceremonial contexts, brick-lined pits, precisely shaped, intentionally placed and repeatedly rebuilt over time. Fire here was not incidental, it was central. The altars consist of rectangular or circular pits lined with baked bricks, often containing ash, charcoal, and remnants of burnt offerings. Their construction shows standardization, similar dimensions, similar materials, similar placement relative to walls and living spaces. Standardization implies rule. Someone knew how these altars were meant to be built. Someone ensured they were built that way again and again. Kalibangan dates to the early and mature phases of the Indus Valley Civilization, roughly between 3000 and 1900 BCE. This places it among one of the world's earliest urban cultures, a civilization known for planning, drainage, and standardized brickwork. But fire altars introduce a different dimension. They suggest ritual life embedded directly into daily space. In many ancient societies, ritual is separated. Temples here, homes there. At Kalibangan, fire appears inside residential zones. This proximity blurs the line between sacred and ordinary. Ritual was not occasional, it was routine. The placement of the fire altars also matters. Some are found aligned in rows, suggesting coordinated use rather than individual improvisation. Others appear near thresholds or courtyards, transitional spaces between inside and outside. Fire marked boundaries. What makes this especially intriguing is how early this pattern appears. The Kalibangan fire altars predate many later Vedic ritual traditions that also emphasize fire as a central element. This has led some researchers to propose continuity, not in text, but in practice, a tradition remembered through action rather than writing. And yet, the Indus Valley civilization left no deciphered texts to confirm belief systems. Their seals show symbols, animals, and motifs, but nothing clearly describing ritual purpose, so the fire altars speak instead. Their construction required understanding of heat, airflow, and material behavior. Bricks had to be fired correctly to withstand repeated use. Ash disposal had to be managed. Locations had to be chosen to avoid accidental fires while still allowing ritual performance. This is controlled combustion. Fire is dangerous, unpredictable, difficult to contain. To build permanent structures around it implies confidence and knowledge. The fire altars were also rebuilt multiple times in the same locations, indicating long-term continuity. Even as buildings changed or were replaced, the altars remained, respected, renewed, and preserved. This continuity hints at shared belief across generations. Kalibangan also shows evidence of careful city planning, straight streets, drainage systems, standardized housing blocks. The fire altars were integrated into this plan rather than added later. They were part of the original design. This integration suggests that ritual was not secondary to urban life. It was foundational. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Kalibangan fire altars stand out because they reveal something subtle but profound. Advanced civilization is not only about technology. It is about rhythm. Daily acts repeated with meaning. Spaces designed to accommodate belief. Knowledge carried through habit rather than monument. The people of Kalibangan did not build towering temples to announce their faith. They built hearths, durable, precise, and shared, and placed them where life unfolded. Fire connected people to cycles: cooking, warmth, ritual, renewal, destruction, rebirth. It connected past to present. And when the city was eventually abandoned, as much of the Indus Valley was, the fire altars were left behind, silent, filled with ash and memory. They remind us that some of the most important structures in human history were not meant to impress future generations. They were meant to be used, again and again, until the people were gone, and only the careful shapes of fire remained, waiting beneath the sand to tell their quiet story. Are Rasa's stone platforms. In the open plains of central Jordan, far from dramatic cliffs or dense forests, lies a site that reveals its mystery slowly. There are no towering monuments here, no massive statues or carved reliefs demanding attention. Instead, the ground itself has been carefully shaped. leveled, reinforced, and patterned with stone. This is Rasas, known today primarily for its later Roman and Byzantine remains. The deeper story of Rasas begins much earlier, at ground level, where stone platforms form the quiet backbone of the site. These platforms appear simple at first glance, but their scale, repetition, and placement suggest something far more deliberate. They were not casual foundations. The stone platforms consist of tightly packed stone layers forming raised, stable surfaces across uneven terrain. They are distributed across the site with consistency, creating zones of elevation that separate space subtly but effectively. Elevation matters. In flat landscapes, even slight changes in height transform how space is used. Raised platforms define importance. They create dry ground during rains. They distinguish ritual or administrative areas from ordinary movement. Someone planned this. Archaeological evidence indicates that Rasas was occupied continuously for centuries, possibly beginning as early as the Iron Age, long before its later fortifications and churches. These early stone platforms likely formed the structural core upon which later civilizations built. The later builders did not erase them, they reused them. This reuse is telling. Stone platforms that continue to support construction across centuries are not accidental, they are trusted. Their dimensions, stability, and placement were correct from the beginning. That kind of correctness comes from experience. The stones themselves are local limestone, selected for durability and ease of shaping. They are not finely cut, but they are carefully fitted. Weight is distributed evenly. Voids are minimized. The result is a surface that resists shifting despite seasonal temperature changes and soil movement. This is quiet engineering. What makes Rasas particularly intriguing is the absence of spectacle. Unlike cities designed to impress outsiders, this site feels inward-facing. The platforms organize space for those who lived there, not those who passed by. This suggests function over display. Some platforms appear aligned with pathways, guiding movement through the settlement. Others cluster near areas later used for religious structures, suggesting continuity of sacred space long before formal temples existed. Sacredness often begins subtly. A place elevated, a surface prepared, a location returned to. Over time, meaning accumulates. The stone platforms also speak to adaptation. In a semi-arid environment, managing water is critical. Raised surfaces reduce flooding, protect structures, and allow runoff to be directed intentionally. Even without visible channels, the platforms influence how water behaves during rare but intense rains. This is landscape awareness, not trial and error. What we do not find at Rasas is just as important. There is no evidence of monumental ambition in its earliest phases, no attempt to dominate the horizon, no grand statements of power. Instead, there is consistency, platform after platform, each doing its job quietly. This challenges a common assumption. That ancient engineering always aimed upward. That progress must be visible. At Rasas, progress is horizontal. It spreads. It stabilizes. It allows later complexity to emerge without collapse. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the stone platforms of Rasas remind us that civilization often begins not with monuments, but with preparation. Before walls rise, the ground must be made ready. Before temples stand, space must be defined. Before meaning is declared, it must be supported. These platforms were not meant to be admired. They were meant to endure, and they did. Long after empires came and went, long after new beliefs layered over old ones, the stone platforms remained, still holding weight, still shaping movement, still doing the work they were designed to do. Standing among them today, the experience is calm, almost uneventful. But that calm is deceptive, because beneath your feet is one of the most reliable indicators of ancient intelligence. Not what people built to be seen, but what they built to last. Togalok 21. In the desert plains of modern Turkmenistan, far from oceans and mountains, there is a site that feels almost erased by time. Low mud brick walls rise only slightly above the sand. From ground level, it appears quiet, even modest. But beneath that stillness lies one of the most provocative ritual complexes of the Bronze Age. This is Togolok 21. The site belongs to the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, often shortened to BMAC, a civilization that flourished around 2300 to 1700 BCE in Central Asia. For decades, this culture remained poorly understood, overshadowed by better-known civilizations to the west and south. Togolok 21 changed that. What archaeologists uncovered here was not a settlement, not a palace, and not a fort, but a carefully planned ritual center dominated by fire. Multiple altars, enclosed spaces, and ash-filled chambers were arranged with precision, suggesting repeated ceremonial use over long periods of time. Fire here was not symbolic, decoration. It was the focus. At the heart of Togolok 21 are rectangular and circular fire installations lined with mud brick and clay, some showing intense heat exposure. Ash layers were found undisturbed, indicating controlled, sustained burning rather than accidental fires. These were not hearths, they were altars. The layout of the site reinforces this interpretation. Walls guide movement inward, not outward. Spaces become more restricted toward the center, limiting access and controlling visibility. This is ritual architecture, designed to shape behavior, not accommodate daily life. Such design requires forethought. Fire is dangerous in enclosed spaces. To maintain it safely, builders had to understand airflow, heat dispersion, and material limits. Mud brick composition had to resist cracking. Ash had to be removed and managed. The repetition of intact altars shows that these challenges were solved, again and again. What makes Togolok 21 especially unsettling is its timing. The site predates the earliest written evidence of organized fire-centered religion in nearby regions. And yet, many features here resemble later ritual traditions associated with fire: structured spaces, controlled access, repeated offerings. This has led some researchers to propose that Togolok 21 represents an early form of fire ritual that later spread or evolved elsewhere, not through conquest, through ideas. There is no evidence of elite residences at the site, no royal tombs, no monumental inscriptions. This suggests that ritual authority here may have been communal or priestly rather than political, power expressed through ceremony rather than command. The site was also abandoned deliberately. There are no signs of destruction or sudden collapse. Instead, Togolok 21 appears to have been closed. Fire installations left intact, spaces left orderly. This mirrors patterns seen at other ritual sites where purpose ends not in chaos, but in completion. The silence that followed was long. Wind covered the walls. Sand filled the spaces. Memory faded. For thousands of years, the site lay unnoticed, its significance buried beneath desert ground. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Togolok 21 stands out because it reveals something easy to overlook: that complex belief systems do not require writing, empires, or monuments. They require repetition. They require space. They require understanding of material and ritual combined. Togolok 21 shows us that Bronze Age societies in Central Asia were not peripheral or primitive. They were experimenting with structured ceremonial life at a level that feels surprisingly early and surprisingly sophisticated. Here, architecture serves belief directly. Walls guide ritual. Fire anchors meaning. Standing at the site today, with desert stretching endlessly in all directions, it is difficult to imagine the intensity that once filled these enclosures: flame, heat, movement, and intention. But the evidence remains: burned clay, careful walls, deliberate absence. Togolok 21 reminds us that some of humanity's deepest ideas about transformation, purity, and continuity were not written down when they first appeared. They were practiced. And sometimes those practices leave behind only ash and quiet geometry, waiting patiently for history to catch up.